Imagine reaching 57 years old and realizing you never lived for yourself, that every step of your life was guided by rules that weren't yours, that you were a wife because they said it was right. You were a mother because they expected it of you. You took care of the house, the table, the lunch, the smile, but no one ever took care of you. Now tell me, have you ever felt that your life was a room you walked into, but were never allowed to turn on the light? She felt it. She grew up hearing, "A woman must endure. Family is sacred. The important thing is to keep everything in order." And so she did. For decades. A marriage without affection. Children who only knew how to demand. Silences that weighed more than words. Nights where she slept facing away and woke up even lonelier. They raised her to serve, but never to be seen. Until one day, at 57, the world collapsed. Or maybe it finally opened up. And it was in that instant, when everyone thought she would fall, that she stood up. She did something almost no one has the courage to do. She started to look at herself. And by looking at herself, she found something no one expected. Life, strength, desire, and later, love. True love. The kind that asks for nothing in return, only wants to be near. Because it is never too late to start over. It is never too late to choose yourself. It is never too late to love yourself for the very first time. And this is the story of a woman who only started living at 57. Prepare yourself. Because after listening, you might just discover that your time is now too. The day the world opened. Her name was Eleanor, 57 years old, a resident of a quiet Chicago suburb. And the day her world collapsed started like any other. With the hum of the coffee maker and the smell of the expensive coffee she brewed for her husband, Richard. It was 7:02 a.m. Richard paused at the foot of the stairs. He didn't have his work briefcase. He had the black, rolling suitcase. "I'm leaving, Eleanor," he said, his voice as neutral as the morning news, adjusting the tie she had ironed the night before. Eleanor stopped, her hand on the cabinet. "Leaving? Was the 9 o'clock meeting canceled?" He sighed, that impatient sigh she knew so well, the sigh that said she was being slow. "I'm moving in with Amanda." "From the office," he said, as if informing her he was going to buy milk. "The papers are with the lawyer. He'll call today." Eleanor did not move. She heard the click-clack of the wheels on the hardwood floor and the soft sound of the front door closing. That moment was an amputation. Shocking, painful, but clean. The real poison, the soul-burning pain, came 2 hours later. She was still sitting in the silent kitchen, Richard's coffee untouched on the counter. She called Kevin, 30, her little boy, the man whose soccer games she had watched in freezing rain, whose diplomas she had proudly framed. "Kevin," her voice trembled, the first crack in the ice. "Your father, he left me." There was a pause on the other end. Not a pause of shock, a pause of calculation. "Crap, Mom," Kevin said, his voice muffled by traffic. "Did he say anything about the house? Because legally, he can't just kick you out. But if he wants to sell, the market is terrible. You need a lawyer. I know a guy, but he's expensive. Can you afford him?" Eleanor felt the air rush out of her lungs. There was no, "Are you okay, Mom?" There was no, "I'm coming right over." There was a question about the brick, about the asset. She hung up before he could start talking about capital gains. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. She took a deep breath. "Sarah will understand," she thought. "Sarah is my girl." She called Sarah, her youngest, her confidant. The bride she was, at that very moment, helping plan a $50,000 wedding for. "Mom, hi, I can't talk. I'm at the cake tasting. What is it?" "Honey, your dad. He left. He's with another woman." A sharp silence, and then a scream. But it wasn't a scream of empathy. "He what? Now?" Sarah shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. "Mom, couldn't he have waited 6 months? Do you have any idea what this does to my wedding? Who's going to walk me down the aisle? How are we going to explain this? People will pity you on my day. You have to do something. You have to call him and tell him he can't do this now." Click. Sarah hung up. Eleanor stared at the silent phone. Richard took 35 years to slowly kill her with indifference. Her children took less than 5 minutes to bury her alive with their narcissism. The house, which she had spent her entire life cleaning, organizing, and filling with the smell of apple pie, suddenly felt like a tomb. Every object was a headstone to her servitude. She wasn't a mother. She was a caretaker. She wasn't a wife. She was an administrator. She stood up. She did not cry. She felt something much colder than sadness. She felt rage, a silent, deep anger that started in the soles of her feet. She walked to the downstairs bathroom and looked in the mirror. She saw a 57-year-old woman, gray hair tied back in a loose bun, tired eyes, worry lines that weren't hers, they were theirs. She was still wearing the faded blue apron Kevin and Sarah gave her for Mother's Day 5 years ago. She pulled the knot of the apron so hard the fabric tore at the seam. She ripped it off her body. She crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. She walked upstairs, not like a victim, but like someone inspecting a condemned property. She went to the office, opened Richard's computer, and there it was. Hotel reservations under Amanda, jewelry purchases she never received. But she wasn't looking for that. She already knew. She opened the banking app. She looked at the joint savings account, the money she had meticulously saved for 2 decades, for emergencies. The money Richard barely knew existed because she handled the household finances. The emergency had arrived. She looked at the balance. And for the first time that day, Eleanor smiled. It wasn't a pretty smile. It was the smile of someone who has just found the key to their own cell. She pressed transfer. The click of the mouse transferring the money was the loudest sound Eleanor heard that day. Louder than Richard's door closing, louder than Sarah's screams on the phone. It was the sound of a lock springing open, clearing the debris. In the next 30 minutes, Eleanor's phone exploded. First, it was Richard's lawyer with a pompous voice, talking about legal action and misappropriation. Eleanor just listened. Then, it was Richard himself. For the first time in 20 years, he was screaming. "Have you gone insane, Eleanor?" he bellowed. "That was our retirement money. You can't just take it." Eleanor, standing in the middle of the living room, looked at the $8,000 beige leather sofa, the couch where Richard watched football and fell asleep every Sunday, ignoring her. "Was it, Richard?" she said, and her own voice sounded strange to her ears. It was calm, cold as the kitchen marble. "I saved that money. It was $20 a week, then $50, then $100 for 25 years. You were too busy with your investments and your co-workers. Consider it my share of the house, the share I cleaned, decorated, and kept standing while you used it like a hotel. You're going to regret this, he started. She hung up. The phone rang again. Kevin. "Mom, Dad called me. He said you stole the money. Mom, what the hell are you doing? You're going to have a nasty fight in the divorce and the house will be sold for nothing. You're destroying my inheritance." "My inheritance. Not your, my." "I'm not destroying anything, Kevin," Eleanor said. "I'm cleaning up." She hung up. The next call was Sarah, already sobbing. "Mom, Dad said you emptied the account. Mom, how am I going to pay the florist? The hall deposit is due next week. You can't do this to me." Eleanor looked at the grand piano in the corner of the room. Sarah insisted on having it at 16. She played it for 6 months. Now it served only as an expensive sideboard for dusty family photos. "I'm very sorry, honey," Eleanor said, and she truly was, but not for her daughter. "It looks like you'll have to choose a smaller cake." She hung up the phone and activated Do Not Disturb mode. The house was deadly silent. The tomb, the museum of a life that wasn't hers. She walked to the coat closet, took out her best overcoat, her purse, and her car keys. She didn't go to a lawyer. She didn't go to a friend. She drove downtown to Chicago and stopped in front of an elegant building. Right encobered luxury auctioneers and appraisers. A man in a suit named Mr. Harrison met her. "Mrs. Miller," he said, looking at Eleanor's practical jeans and beige coat. "How can I help you?" "I want to sell everything," Eleanor said. "I beg your pardon?" "Everything. The Italian leather sofa, the solid oak dining set, the grand piano, the crystal chandelier in the dining room, the china my mother-in-law gave me, my husband's watch collection that he forgot in the drawer." Mr. Harrison blinked. "Ma'am, that's a process, we usually do an appraisal. I don't want an appraisal. I want boxes. I want you to take it all. I want a check. What doesn't sell, donate. I don't care about the price. I just want space. If this story has touched you so far, if you understand what it's like to feel the need to clean up your own life just to breathe, like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't believe what she does with that space. 3 days later, Eleanor's house was an echo. 2 trucks took away 80% of what she owned. Mr. Harrison, sensing the urgency and the easy profit, acted fast. He gave her a cashier's check that made her eyes water. Kevin and Sarah didn't know. They lived in their own downtown apartments. They just assumed their mother was at home, crying on the floor. And she was, but not from sadness. That night, Eleanor sat on the bare hardwood floor of the empty living room. The sound of her feet echoed. The smell of dust and lemon from the cleaning products was gone, replaced by the scent of bare wood. She ordered Chinese food. For the first time in her life, she ate straight from the box, sitting on the floor, without worrying about staining the Persian rug, which was also sold. She felt light. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. The same 57-year-old woman, but something was different. Her eyes, they weren't tired anymore. They were alert. She slept on the mattress in the guest room, which she kept. She woke up the next day before the sun rose. She made coffee, just for her, and sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket. She watched the sun rise, painting the Illinois sky orange and purple. She had never done this. She was always too busy making their breakfast. She picked up her notebook, opened a map. She had always dreamed of seeing the ocean, but not the hot, crowded ocean of Florida, where Richard took her on obligatory family vacations. She wanted to see the cold, wild, angry ocean. She wanted to see Portland, Oregon, a city she only knew from pictures, a city of bridges, roses, bookstores, and rain, a place where no one knew her as wife of or mother of. She used Mr. Harrison's money and bought a ticket, not a plane ticket. She didn't want to arrive quickly. She wanted the journey. She bought a train ticket, a private cabin on the Empire Builder, which would take her from Chicago, across the plains, over the mountains, to the Pacific coast. A 46-hour journey. The next morning, a taxi pulled up in front of the empty house. Eleanor got out, locking the door. She left the key under the doormat. Eventually, Richard's lawyers or her children would find it. The house was theirs now. The tomb was theirs. She carried a single rolling suitcase. New, red. She went to Union Station, the Great Hall of Chicago, pulsing with life. She looked up at the vaulted ceiling, smelled the coffee and diesel, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't scared. She was terrified, and it was wonderful. When the train whistled, she handed over her ticket, stepped into the carriage, and found her small cabin. She sat by the window. The train lurched and began to move, slowly, sliding out of the city that contained all of her old life. She did not look back. The journey to Eleanor. The Empire Builder wasn't just a train. It was a moving time capsule, carrying Eleanor away from a past she had just demolished, toward a future she didn't even know existed. The first few hours were a blur of disappearing suburbs, giving way to the vast cornfields of Wisconsin and Minnesota. Eleanor kept her phone on airplane mode. The digital silence was a balm. For the first time, no one needed her. There were no dinners to plan, no schedules to coordinate, no egos to massage. There was only her and the window. She went to the dining car. The waiter, a kind man in a rumpled uniform, asked, "Table for one, ma'am?" Eleanor hesitated. She never ate alone in a restaurant. Richard always said it was something sad people do. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "Please." She sat as the train swayed gently. She ordered a steak, the most expensive thing on the menu, and a glass of red wine. She ate slowly, savoring it. She watched other people, a laughing family, a young student with headphones, an elderly couple holding hands. They were just people, and she was one of them. Anonymous, free. That night, she lay in the small bed of her cabin. The train cut through the darkness of the North Dakota plains, under a sky so full of stars, it looked fake. The rhythmic sound of the rails, clack, 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 wasn't a noise. It was a lullaby. She hadn't slept so deeply in 30 years. On the second day, the world changed. The plains gave way to the dramatic vastness of Montana. Mountains rose on the horizon like jagged teeth against the blue sky. She spent hours in the observation car, with its glass dome, just looking, seeing the America she only knew from the documentaries Richard watched while she did the dishes. She saw eagles. She saw rivers running so fast they looked white. She felt how small she was, and how small the walls of her Chicago house had really been. She thought of Kevin and Sarah. A pang of pain, yes, but it was no longer the pain of guilt. It was the pain of disappointment. She loved them, but she realized they loved the function she performed, not the person she was. She sent a single text message, which she had written and rewritten in her mind, to both of them. I need some time for myself. I am safe. I don't know when I'll be back. The house and the divorce are with the lawyers. Take care. She pressed send as the train briefly stopped at a station, and then put the phone back on airplane mode. Their response no longer mattered. Cannon Beach and the yellow coat. On the morning of the third day, the air changed. The smell was different. The air coming through the vent was no longer dry and dusty. It was damp, heavy with the scent of pine trees and wet earth. They were in Oregon. When the train finally slid into Portland's Union Station, Eleanor felt a nervousness that almost made her turn back. What was she doing? She was 57, had a red suitcase, and no plan. She stepped onto the platform. The air was cold, drizzling, but it felt incredibly clean. She didn't go to a hotel. She took a cab and gave the driver the address of a small apartment she rented online for a month in the Nob Hill neighborhood. It was a studio, smaller than her kitchen in Chicago. It was perfect. She put the suitcase on the floor, looked at the simple bed and the small kitchen, and took a deep breath, but she didn't stay. She dropped her purse and left. She hailed another cab. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. "To the ocean," Eleanor said. "What's the closest place to see the Pacific Ocean?" "That would be Cannon Beach," he said. "But it's a good drive, over an hour and a half." "I'll pay," Eleanor said. The drive was silent. They left the city and entered a dense, verdant forest, unlike anything she had ever seen. When they finally left the highway and drove down a small winding road, she saw it. It wasn't the calm blue of the Atlantic in Florida. It was the Pacific. It was gray, dark blue, vast and furious. Waves crashed against massive rocks that rose from the water like ancient gods. The wind was so strong it almost knocked her over when she stepped out of the cab. She took off the comfortable shoes she was wearing for travel. She walked onto the wet, cold sand. The drizzle dampened her face, mixing with something else. She stood before the immensity. The sound was deafening. The roar of the waves, the cry of the gulls, the howl of the wind. It was the opposite of the silence of her home. It was the sound of life. The salty wind whipped her gray hair, freeing it from the tight bun. She opened her arms, her beige coat flapping around her, and she laughed. And then she cried. She cried for the 35 lost years. She cried for the invisibility. She cried for the ingratitude of her children. She cried for the man she no longer even recognized. But above all, she cried from relief, because each of those waves seemed to be washing away a layer of dirt, a layer of service, a layer of, "You have to." She stood there until her feet were numb with cold. She finally understood. She hadn't run away from Chicago. She had, for the first time in her life, run towards something. She was home. That night, in her tiny apartment, she took the hottest shower of her life. The next day, she went to a thrift store. She took her beige coat, the color of invisibility, and put it in the donation box. She bought a raincoat, yellow, bright as the sun. She walked the streets of Portland, stopped at a coffee shop, ordered a lavender latte, something Richard would have scoffed at, and sat by the window. She was no longer Mrs. Miller. She wasn't Mom. She was Eleanor, and she was hungry. The list and Arthur. She bought a notebook and a pen. On the first page, she wrote, "Things I want to do." Number 1 was, get a job. Number 2, learn to take care of a rose. Number 3, don't look back. Eleanor's list became her compass. Getting a job at 57 without recent experience felt daunting. In Chicago, she was just a homemaker. But in Portland, She was a blank page. She saw a sign in the window of the city's most famous bookstore, Powell's. Part-time stalker wanted. She walked in, her bright yellow raincoat now slightly damp from the constant drizzle. The manager, a young man with thick-rimmed glasses, looked at her, perhaps expecting her to be looking for the gardening section. "I'd like to apply for the stalker position," Eleanor said. He looked surprised. "It's heavy work, ma'am. Lots of bending, carrying boxes." Eleanor thought of the grocery boxes for 4 people, the bags of soil for the garden Richard insisted on having but never touched, the furniture she dragged alone to clean. "I'm stronger than I look," she said with a half smile. She was hired. The job was, in fact, heavy, but it was good. It was physical. She spent hours among endless rows of books, the smell of new paper and coffee filling her lungs. She organized worlds, put stories in order. And at the end of the day, her body ached, but her mind was clear. She received a paycheck, hers. She bought a small pot and a book, Growing Roses for Beginners. She placed it on the small windowsill of her studio. 6 weeks passed. She had moved from her temporary rental to a permanent one-bedroom apartment, still small, but with a balcony large enough for more pots. She became a regular at the corner coffee shop. She learned the baristas' names. She read the books she borrowed from the bookstore. She went to the movies, alone, at Tuesday matinees. Her children called, of course. The messages were a confused mix of anger. "Dad is furious about the divorce settlement," and manipulative guilt. "You're going to miss my wedding, Mom. I hope you're happy." Eleanor responded with the same phrase. "I'm taking care of myself. I'm sorry you feel that way. I love you." And then she hung up. Guilt no longer held her captive. It was just a distant noise, like Chicago traffic. One Saturday morning, she decided it was time to address item number 2 on her list more seriously. She signed up as a volunteer at the Rosemont Community Garden, a patch of greenery in the middle of the city where people rented small plots to grow vegetables and flowers. She was assigned to help fix some raised beds that were rotting. She was struggling with a hammer and bent nails when a calm voice sounded behind her. "If you hold the hammer a little further back, you'll get more force, like this." A large, calloused but gentle hand covered hers for a second, adjusting her grip. Eleanor turned. It was a man, probably a couple of years older than her. Tall, with thick gray hair, blue eyes that seemed to have seen a lot, and a worn flannel shirt. He smelled of sawdust and earth. "Thank you," Eleanor said, a little flustered. "I'm clearly giving away that I don't know what I'm doing." He laughed, a low, warm sound. "No one is born knowing. I'm Arthur. I take care of the wood maintenance around here." He pointed to the beds. "I'm a carpenter. Retired, mostly." "Eleanor, I'm new here." "I noticed," he smiled. "Welcome, Eleanor. Let me show you." He didn't take her hammer. He didn't take control. He stood next to her and explained. He talked about the grain of the wood, about how cedar resists the Portland rain. He spoke with passion about his craft. She listened, and she asked a question, and he answered. They worked together that morning, fixing 3 beds. He told her he had been widowed for 5 years. She told him she was new to Portland. She didn't mention Richard or the children. She just said, "I needed a change." Arthur seemed to understand exactly what she meant. By noon, they were cleaning up the tools. "I'm going for a coffee at the corner kiosk," Arthur said, casually, not looking directly at her. "They have banana bread that's ridiculously good. Would you like to?" Eleanor's heart leaped in a way she hadn't felt in, well, ever. It wasn't the anxious nervousness of trying to please Richard. It was something different. It was anticipation. "I'd love to," she said. They sat at a small metal table outside, eating banana bread and drinking steaming coffees. They talked about gardening, about the Oregon weather, about books. He had just finished a mystery novel she had stocked at the bookstore the week before. The conversation was easy. There were no heavy silences. There was no veiled criticism. There were just 2 people in their 50s and 60s enjoying the fresh morning air. When they finished, he stood up. "Well, Eleanor, it was a pleasure meeting you. I'll be here next Saturday if you come back." He didn't ask for her number. He didn't pressure her. "I'll be here," she replied. The straight grain of true love. And she was. The next Saturday, and the one after. They became garden friends. Then, coffee friends. One day, he invited her to see his carpentry workshop at his small house. It was immaculate, full of tools and the smell of freshly cut wood. Months passed. Spring arrived in Portland, and the city burst into color. The roses she planted on her balcony began to bloom. One afternoon, Arthur took her for a walk along the Willamette River. They stopped to watch one of the sailboats pass under a bridge. "You look different than when you arrived," he said quietly. "Different how?" "Happy," he said. "Your eyes, they don't look scared anymore." Eleanor looked at him. He was looking at her with a kind of respect and affection she had never received from Richard. It wasn't possession. It was admiration. He extended his hand, not to grab hers, but palm up, an invitation. Eleanor looked at his hand, calloused from work, but steady. She placed her hand in his. They fit perfectly. "I'm happy too, Arthur," she said. Life, for Eleanor, stopped being a series of obligations and became a series of firsts. The first time she walked through a farmer's market and bought fresh vegetables, not because she needed them for someone's dinner, but because she wanted to try a celery root. The first time she spent an entire afternoon at Powell's bookstore, not stocking boxes, but sitting on the floor of the poetry aisle, reading Rilke, and no one interrupted her. Her relationship with Arthur blossomed the same way as her roses, slowly, carefully, and demanding sunlight. It wasn't an explosive, desperate romance. It was something much better. It was an adult love, a love based on conversations, not demands. He brought her coffee in the mornings, and she helped him sand a piece of wood in his workshop. They went to concerts in the park, sitting on canvas chairs, sharing a blanket. He listened to her. When she spoke, his eyes didn't wander to his cell phone or the TV. He listened to her as if what she said mattered. One day, 6 months after meeting, they were in the community garden, picking tomatoes. "You talk a lot about Portland," Arthur said, wiping the dirt from his hands. "But you never talk about Chicago, about what you left behind." Eleanor stopped what she was doing. The cold morning wind before had taught her not to run from anything. "I left behind a very big and very silent house," she said. "I had a husband who saw me as a property manager, and 2 adult children who saw me as an ATM and an agenda." She waited for him to judge her, to say she was a bad mother for leaving. Arthur just shook his head, his gentle blue eyes unwavering. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry they couldn't see who you are. The loss was theirs, Eleanor, not yours." In that moment, something that had been broken inside her for 35 years finally seemed to click into place. A week later, the divorce was finalized. It was brutal. Richard, furious, had the lawyers fight for every penny. Eleanor didn't fight back. She already had what she needed: the savings she had built herself, the money from the sold furniture, and her freedom. Richard kept the house. The first call she received after it was over wasn't from a lawyer. It was from Kevin. "Mom," he said, his voice strained. "So that's it. The house was sold. Sarah and I had to clear out your stuff. It was hell." "I'm sorry it was difficult, Kevin," she said, watering her roses on the balcony. "Is that all you have to say? Sarah is devastated that you literally abandoned us. You missed her wedding." Eleanor closed her eyes. She imagined the blue apron. She imagined the silence. "No, Kevin," she said, her voice calm, but with a weight of steel. "I didn't abandon you. You are adults. I abandoned a life where I was invisible. I resigned from a job that didn't pay me and that consumed me. I love you, but I am no longer your caretaker. I am finally Eleanor." There was a long, shocked silence on the other end. He had no answer for Eleanor. He only knew how to speak to Mom. She hung up. The real beginning. The following spring arrived, marking 1 year since she took that train. Eleanor, now 58, was laughing. It was a laugh that came from deep in her belly, something she didn't know existed inside her. She was at a small Italian restaurant in Portland, the lights low, the smell of garlic in the air. Arthur was across from her, telling a story about a client who wanted a deliberately crooked bookshelf. His hand, strong and calloused, was over hers on the checkered tablecloth. "And then I told him," Arthur smiled, his eyes sparkling, "that I spend my life trying to make things straight. I don't know how to make something crooked." Eleanor laughed again. It was so simple, so real. That night, she returned to her apartment. It was small, but it was full. full of books, full of plants, full of the smell of coffee, full of her. She stopped in front of the bathroom mirror, that same place where, in Chicago, she saw an exhausted gray woman in a blue apron. Now she saw a 58-year-old woman. Her gray hair was loose, falling over the shoulders of a red sweater that Arthur said brought out her eyes. There were wrinkles, yes, more than before, but they were laugh lines, wrinkles from squinting against the Pacific sun, wrinkles from being alive. She finally understood the phrase she had read somewhere. Life doesn't begin at 40. Life begins when you decide it will begin. For Eleanor, real life, the life where she was seen, heard, and loved, began at 57, with a red suitcase on a train platform. She leaned toward the mirror, and for the first time, without criticism, without judgment, Eleanor smiled at the woman she saw. And the woman smiled back. Eleanor's story proves that it's never too late to find yourself in true love. If you were moved, if you felt her pain and liberation, please don't leave without giving your like and subscribing to the channel. Turn on the bell to not miss any new stories like this one. And most importantly, comment below what city you are watching from. We want to know how far Eleanor's courage has traveled. Thank you for watching and explore our other videos. You might find your own story in them.